Over the last 2 decades, a record-breaking drought has quietly and steadily boiled away the waters of Lake Mead. Where a massive reservoir once sat, there is now miles of sun-baked, deeply cracked alkali mud. As the waterline recedes, it has pulled back the curtain on decades of grim history. Police and park rangers have found rusted barrels exposed on the dry lake bed, containing the remains of mob execution victims from 1970s Las Vegas. But those discoveries are overshadowed by something vastly larger surfacing in the mud. The shrinking lake is exposing the intact foundations of an entire pioneer city. This is St. Thomas, Nevada. For 80 years, it sat in total darkness at the bottom of the reservoir, completely erased from the map. This city was systematically and deliberately erased by the federal government, a planned casualty of the engineering that built the modern Southwest. The resurrection of St. Thomas forces us to look at exactly why human engineering demanded the death of this community, and what dire warning its return from the depths is signaling today. In 1865, Mormon pioneers arrived at the confluence of the Muddy and Virgin Rivers. They laid out a grid of streets in the fertile valley and planted cotton and grain. The settlement thrived. By the 1920s, St. Thomas was a prosperous agricultural hub of 500 residents, known for its sprawling orchards, cattle ranches, and broad tree-lined avenues. It was a fully self-sustaining community, boasting a school, a hotel, and auto garages to service travelers passing through on the Arrowhead Trail between Salt Lake City and LA. The town's death sentence arrived in 1928. That year, President Calvin Coolidge signed the Boulder Canyon Project Act into law, authorizing a massive concrete arch dam downriver. This chart shows the brutal mathematical reality. St. Thomas sat in a low floodplain at 1,177 feet. Engineers designed the new reservoir to reach 1,229 feet at full pool. To power the west, St. Thomas had to be buried under 50 feet of water. By the early 1930s, massive construction on the Hoover Dam was underway in Black Canyon. The federal government issued mandatory buyout orders. Families who had farmed the valley for generations were forced to dismantle their homes, salvage their lumber, and abandon their land forever. Upstream, the residents watched as the Colorado River slowly backed up, creeping up the valley floor and swallowing their empty fields inch by inch. One resident refused to leave. Hugh Lord, an auto mechanic who owned a garage in town, ignored the evacuation orders and stayed put as the waters advanced. On June 11, 1938, the floodwaters finally reached his front porch. Rather than let the lake swallow his property intact, Lord set his house ablaze. He loaded his belongings, stepped into a rowboat, and paddled away across the rising lake, watching his home burn to the waterline. By the end of the year, St. Thomas was trapped beneath 60 feet of murky green water. For decades, boaters and fishermen floated directly over the sunken streets, oblivious to the ruins resting quietly in the dark. That silence held until the early 21st century, when a record-breaking mega-drought gripped the American Southwest and began draining the reservoir. The entire basin suffered catastrophic water loss. Lake Mead's water levels plummeted by over 150 feet, dropping to historical lows. As the reservoir receded, it exhumed St. Thomas from its underwater grave. The sun-baked foundations of the school, the hotel, and homes saw the open air once again. The receding waters left behind a bizarre debris field on the cracked mud. Rusted car frames from the 1920s, heavy industrial bank vaults, and salt-encrusted skeletons of orchard trees lay scattered across the thick silt. Today, visitors can walk out onto the dry lake bed and trace the exact streets and building outlines that sat crushed under millions of gallons of water for over 8 decades. These foundations now function as a real-time gauge, a physical measurement of a massive region rapidly running out of water. Climate scientists point to the reemergence of St. Thomas as a dire warning. Its dry foundations illustrate the fragile water security threatening tens of millions of people across 7 western states. Decades ago, massive infrastructure projects successfully buried this community to build the modern West. Today, the very climate those projects aim to master is pulling the ruins back into the light. Hydrologists monitor the basin daily, but the lingering question remains: will the Colorado River ever recover enough to drown this desolate desert town again? And as the shoreline continues to retreat, We have to wonder what other sunken secrets, pioneer artifacts, or forgotten crimes are still waiting in the drying mud. Let us know what you think Lake Mead is hiding down there in the comments below. And if you want to explore more dark history and abandoned places with us, hit that subscribe button.